has a hard-on.
Perfect world was a dream between primitive cerebral.
He's a traitor! He's a sadist!
You're all going to die down here.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Happy heresies, my beloved truth seekers. I semi-sincerely hope you've had a matric Christmas and a happy Neo Year by the time you hear my voice on this approximately Saturday, December 29th. And by that I don't mean you've drowned in the castrating commercialization, the false mythology of Jehovah, the opening of toxic family scars, but instead saw the truth of the death and resurrection of the physical sun and the spiritual sun that lies behind the membrane of reality in the kingdoms of imagination.
Welcome to the real world.
For this death and resurrection, this solstice of our discontent, is one of the keys in escaping, as Shakespeare called it, this great stage of fools. The Gnostics called it the kenoma, the emptiness that is the universe. In the East it's known as samsara. In Judaism it's the valley of the shadow of death. Some have called it Midgard, the Matrix, the material plane of Gary Gygax, and other names. Whatever you want to call it, we're here, the souls of gods tied to the bodies of dying animals, and we must find our way home, and a way to help creation itself find its way home. And this is the most positive attitude you'll ever have, because it's not coated with New Age spiritual placebos or fundamentalist cloning dogmas. It is what it is. Like the sun during these days, personified as Mithras, Horus, Krishna, Dionysus, and other godmen, we learn the lesson of dying to our lower selves and rising to a new state of awareness in an alchemical storm.
I'm going to spend the rest of my life in a cage of fear.
And while you encounter your own passion like Achamoth, a lower avatar of Sophia, did when she fell out from the realms of the Aeons and luminaries, know that you can rest at a land called the virtual Alexandria, that axis mundi of speculative thought, that place where Eastern mysticism meets Western occultism, that intersection of all roads of possibility and dream. And here, in one of the districts, you come to coffee, cigarettes, and gnosis, broadcast directly from our homepage, thegodabovegod.com. I am Abraxas, the seal that protected the Knight Templar's treasures, the god of Hermann Hesse and C.G. Jung, the solar logos of the Alexandrian Jews, the super god above Yahweh and Satan, and your psychopomp between the domains of physical life and ego death.
I am the supreme being. I'm not entirely dim.
Light up some fire of the gods like Prometheus. Drink that fuel like the beatnik demigodlings of old, and understand that you are the Gnostics, the veterans of 1,000 psychic wars who have set your controls for the heart of the sun. We are the knowers of the unknown, the outcasts of history and the metaphysical children of Seth. We are the heirs to the divine potentiality that is dormant within each one of us. We are gods in the becoming, and our adversaries, the powers and principalities of orthodoxy, understand this in their rare moments of honesty. As an example, C.S. Lewis once said, God said to his hairless monkey, "Get on with it, become a god." Even the dwarven pope, the evil Athanasius in the 4th century wrote, "For the Son of God became man, that we might become God."
You ask me if I have a God complex? Let me tell you something. I am God.
As the Gnostics, our only weapons are reason, compassion, and the thing called gnosis. And part of gnosis is understanding what went wrong at what time, so that we may travel back and correct it, whether with the impolite truth, mental reconciliation, tacit acceptance, or perhaps a backward reincarnation like the Kabbalists believe.
Careful, Chief. You dig up the past, all you get is dirty.
And one of our greatest questions, or more like an issue that burns within all of us, is what was the historical Jesus like before he was inked into a theological Marvel superhero?
I give you the Buddy Christ.
Underneath those layers of dogma, contradiction, projection, and blinding faith, what was this country bumpkin rabbi like? Or was he much more different? Or, as I know we've wondered about, was he anything at all? Is the real Jesus more like the Gnostic Jesus, a cosmic phantom, a voice of wisdom sown in each one of our hearts, a heroic doppelganger, or just the culmination of the human imagination reaching out for the news, the divine mind of the collective unconscious?
He's not the Messiah! He's a very naughty boy!
And if the truth screams at us that perhaps there never was a Jesus in the flesh, will we be set free, or will our sanity collapse like a Minneapolis bridge? Like St. Paul tells us in the epistle to the Colossians, the glorious riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Or as Jesus says in the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 12, I tell you most solemnly, whoever believes in me will perform the same works as I do myself. No, he will perform even greater works. And as the epistle of John, chapter 4, verse 12 comments, no man hath seen God at any time. If we love one another, God dwelleth in us, and his love is perfected in us. And further down it says, and we have known and believed the love that God hath to us. God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him.
There's no pleasing some people. That's just what Jesus said, sir!
Don't you love how I use the words of orthodoxy to damn their own stances? Anyway, and in other words, no one has seen God, especially in the flesh. Christ is an indwelling force, and we are to be Christ-like in our affairs, bearers and receivers of gnosis that we are. But I'm sure some of you, even self-avowed Gnostics, will still cling to the concept of a carnal Jesus that received enlightenment and then decided not to write a single word. We just can't accept the notion of a cosmic force, but instead want a man to compare ourselves to, even though he is a patchwork character in an original divine play and the latest avatar of the rising dying godman mythopoeia.
Yea, so you say. The one who sits amongst us has already betrayed me this night. Who can it be?
Shoot it, son! Do you want a beverage? Try the mulled wine. It's terrific. No! Leave us alone! Go! Sure, right.
Well, to perhaps put matters at rest, we have today one of my favorite truth seekers, free thinkers, scholars, and closet Gnostics. And this is Acharya S., who is here to discuss her new book, Who Was Jesus? Fingerprints of the Christ. It sounds, and it is, like a CSI investigation, and that is what the long interview will be. Her last two books, The Christ Conspiracy and Sons of God, gave the mythicist case a shot in the arm at the turning of the last and very bloody century. Who was Jesus? Will once and for all, at the very least, make us understand that even if there was a historical Yeshua, he has been forever buried in a tomb of propaganda and incompatible doctrines. He's lost forever, although the Christ within, the God that dwelleth in us, will rise like a teenage erection as soon as we divorce the Orthodox Jesus.
I'm not the Messiah!
Who Was Jesus is a wonderful book in the sense that, besides being well researched, gives us a uniform, thorough, and accessible understanding of the Jesus in the canonical Gospels. It's a short book, fragrant with information you can reference whenever you need to find facts and structure to the Jesus of the Orthodox Bible. You won't lose yourself in the quicksand of scholarly masturbation and hair-splitting theses. Acharya and I have discussed the Orthodox Jesus before in other coffee, cigarettes, and gnosis shows, but this time we lower the boom.
You always got to follow the truth, even if it brings the whole damn thing crashing down around you.
And, as always, you can make up your own darn mind. After all, to our sly minds and tyrannical egos, the right answer on whether Jesus existed or not should be a simple, what does it matter? It's like the student who came to the Zen master and asked him if he had found enlightenment. The master replied, what does it matter? Do you get it? That's it. What does it matter?
It is a journey of evolution, adaptation. The journey we all take. The journey that unites each and every one of us.
But to so many, the fleshy Jesus matters too much, so much that they find themselves deep in the rabbit hole of underlying literalism. Even so many Gnostics. They become obsessed with the historical instead of the myth, that history before history, that private dream of our true selves. We look 2,000 years back when in the now the Christ awaits for us in the cavalry of our hearts. Search for historical truth and your thirst will never end. Search for the truth and your history will never end.
If you do not know the present, how can you claim to know the future?
Jesus is certainly real. Jesus is timeless. Jesus is the Logos, the reason of the divine, the mediator between the heavenly and wrought-in material realms. He is the point where all reality comes into being. But so are you, so is your neighbor, so is the dynamic force they call life. The gospel stories are metaphors, allegories, and symbols that point to that point behind where all reality comes into being. This place is the pleroma, the fullness of the unknown Father, the God above God, the kingdom of heaven that is within you. Let go of history, let go of facts. Just embrace the truth with mind, body, and soul. Like the Gospel of Philip says, Jesus took them all by stealth, for he did not appear as he was, but in the manner in which they would be able to see him. He appeared to them all. He appeared to the great as great. He appeared to the small as small. He appeared to the angels as an angel, and to men as a man. Because of this, his word hid itself from everyone. Some indeed saw him, thinking that they were seeing themselves. But when he appeared to his disciples in glory on the mount, he was not small. He became great, but he made the disciples great, that they might be able to see him in his greatness. So be great and allow Jesus to appear to you as great, as something beyond this world and all the labels that murder it. Furthermore, in the Gospel of Philip it says, "It is not possible for anyone to see anything of the things that actually exist unless he becomes like them. This is not the way with man in the world. He sees the sun without being the sun, and he sees the heaven and the earth and all other things, but he is not these things. This is quite in keeping with the truth. But you saw something of that place, and you became those things. You saw the Spirit, you became the Spirit. You saw Christ, you became Christ. You saw the Father, you shall become the Father. So in this place, you see everything, and do not see yourself. But in that place you do see yourself, and what you see you shall become. So let us become greater than mere men by understanding the real Jesus that never was a mere man. What we see with our third eye we shall become. And Acharya S. will lead the way discussing the canonical Jesus through her new book, Who Was Jesus? Fingerprints of the Christ. This is Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis. I am, and I am Abraxas. This is the Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis interview. With us, we have my favorite truth seeker, freethinker, and closet Gnostic, Acharya S. How you doing today, Acharya?
Well, hello there, my dear. It's nice to be on your show again.
Always my pleasure, of course. And
I don't know that I'm a closet Gnostic. A closet Gnostic. A closet Gnostic.
Well, that's what I like to think.
Let's see, what's the word? There's very weird terminology in Gnosticism, but I don't sit around and thinking about the pleroma and archons and stuff like that. Whether I'm in the closet or not, I don't really contemplate it very much. If you want to define Gnostic as someone who knows, which is what the word gnosis means in Greek, then I know a few things, so I guess I could be called Gnostic. I'd prefer to be called Gnostic than agnostic, which means I don't know. So they claim that if you want to appear really wise, then you'll be so humble like Socrates and say, the more I know, the less I know. I know that I don't know. But to me, that's just a bunch of false piety that smacks of hooey.
Well, there you go. Well,
I actually know quite a bit.
Yes, you do. That's why I consider you a Gnostic. You have, as Elaine Pagels call it, it's an insight into things. That's what Gnosis is. And you have a lot of insight into things previously unknown, uncharted territory. So in that sense...
recognizing that.
Always do. But anyway, Acharya, why did you decide to write a third book concerning your favorite sun god? What is your obsession with you and Jesus?
Well, you are speaking of my latest release called Who Was Jesus? Fingerprints of the Christ, which I published under my own publishing company called Stellar House Publishing, LLC. I'm very proud of it. I am, because it's hard work, boy. Just getting everything together and then finally ending up with it in your hands is, I really enjoyed it.
Oh, I bet.
So, anyway, this particular book, see, over the years, people would read Christ Con, The Christ Conspiracy, the greatest story ever sold, and then Sons of God, Krishna, Buddha, and Christ Unveiled, which is extremely dense and scholarly and heavy and hard for a lot of people to digest. And so people had asked me repeatedly to write a more readily available book, specifically on Jesus, that they could pass along to their friends and family members who were still involved in Christianity and might not be amenable to plowing through the other books. So what I did was I addressed basically just the New Testament texts, specifically the 4 canonical Gospels. I dug around in them, I got the story, I encapsulated the main story using Matthew, and then I wrote different chapters on each Gospel about what the differences were between them and the similarities and which came first and so forth. Also threw in quotes from a number of almost 20 Christian scholars or New Testament scholars. Most of them are evangelists and apologists that I quoted in here to show that there are difficulties with a number of aspects of the gospel story and the New Testament documents, or texts as I call them, because they don't really document anything, it is my contention. They document the creation of a myth. I go into a great deal of exegesis or analysis of the texts themselves without bringing in the sun god mythos. There's a little bit of a hint in there where I quote the early church fathers retorting that Christianity is not sun worship. They actually had to write a screed against the accusations that Christianity was sun worship. So, where there's smoke, there's fire. You don't go out of your way to protest against something unless you've been accused of it. So, and I don't even see it as an accusation, because sun worship is far more logical than worshiping a guy of a particular ethnicity who supposedly lived 2,000 years ago. So anyway, that's the reason I wrote it.
Yeah, and what I liked about it, it's a really, really good, concise, yet approachable handbook in understanding Jesus and the canonicals from all sides. I mean, you break it down, it's not like 1,000 pages, scholarly, Dominique Crossan kind of book. And it's something great you could carry around even if you're not, an expert at it. But why in the book, as the book goes on, you kind of lay a trap, because towards the end of the book, you really let them have it. You really just go wham.
Yeah, I did. You noticed that. I started off really gently because I'm trying not to alienate people off the bat. Although I do hint at it, because I really don't want to be accused of, as you say, laying a trap. So in the introduction, which is fairly short, I do hint that there are various perspectives of this story. Now, one is obviously the believing perspective. People believe that everything in the Bible is true, and Jesus was real, and he did all these things. And then there's what's called the Ephemera perspective, which is, well, there was some guy there, but he didn't do all the magic tricks. But the story basically has some historicity. And then there's a third perspective, and I don't really say what that is until towards the back, as I'm leading people through the problems of it. And I did that pretty deliberately. I drop a little hint or two along the way, so it wouldn't be completely shocking. But, I start off very, very much in the believing camp, and this is what the story is, and here's what the mainstream perspective and scholarship is on the subject. And then as you get back further into the book, then you start finding a few problems here and there. And I did intend it both that way, to lead the reader more or less gently to the conclusion, which is basically that there is no evidence that this character was historical and existed on planet Earth. And along the way, like I said, I drop a couple of hints about mythology, but I kept the comparative mythology down to a minimum, because that really sticks in the craw of the apologists, that they focus on that so much that you lose your attention is taken away from the problems with the text itself. And so I spent a lot of time on the problems with the text itself. I did deliberately make this book as short as I could and as small as I could, to be portable. Because people like these are great things to give out to somebody coming to your door, like Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah,
here,
exactly.
so everybody should have like 10 copies of this book, and they're say, "Here, read this. Here, read that." I would love to see that happen. That was the intention of making it the size it is. But on the other hand, it's pretty dense. I packed a lot of information into it. There's really no fluff and very little repetition. The one thing that is repetitive, I've been told by one individual, is that. I hammer home the point that there's really no evidence that this story ever took place in history. But that is the point of the book. So I didn't set out to make that conclusion when I first started researching this data, but that's what I came to. And now I decided with this particular book to do a real forensic CSI-style job on it, to show, look, even if we accept that this happened, there's some parts where I said, even if we accept that Jesus Christ is a historical character against all evidence, then we have serious problems with the story itself. There are contradictions, there are absurdities, there are repellent doctrines, there are anachronisms that make it just seems so artificial. And even if you can get past those parts, I don't think this guy was such a great character in the long run. I don't think this person would be worthy of worshiping. I don't think this person should be going down in history as the greatest man who ever lived. Not at all. There are so many other people on this planet who have done so much more and lived a little bit longer than that. We're talking, 33 at maximum that this person supposedly lived, and accomplished other people have accomplished much more. So why are we so agog about this particular character, whether or not he was real? He's just not. I don't see him as the greatest role model. Other people have managed to live their lives much more smoothly and with less trauma and carrying on than him. And these repellent doctrines are hard to overlook. I mean, we can't just overlook the fact that he supposedly said things like, "Unless you hate your mother and father, you can't follow me." Unless you, and not a word condemning slavery. Slavery at the time, this is something ludicrous, okay? When Jesus supposedly lived, now if you were the god of the cosmos, would you come down in a backwater where there is nobody practically? Or that's the depiction in the story. It's a small, tiny place with just a few handful of people and shepherds.
In the land far away, yes, like Luke Skywalker or something.
Yeah, that's right. He was out in the middle of nowhere. Now, that isn't even reality of the time. It didn't happen like that. It didn't look like that. The background of the Judea was not all shepherds and wilderness. It was thoroughly built. There's only 90. This is what I also point out. You notice I included a map in my book. Oh, no, you didn't see that map. But there's a map to show that 90 miles long the story took place in. You take this dinky little area, and all this drama is going on there, and people think that it's off in the middle of nowhere, and nobody else would have been aware of what's going on. That's why we don't have any evidence that he existed and so forth. But the fact remains that this was a well-trodden path from Babylon to Egypt for hundreds of years before that, and then you have other parts of what became Turkey, and even down the coast from Greece. That would be your land route going through there to Egypt. If you want to go to Egypt, this was not an isolated area. It became isolated because, and I'm starting to wonder if this isn't deliberate, after 70 CE, 167, when I'm sorry, 135, when Judea was destroyed. First Judea and then all of Palestine were destroyed. I mean, was this destroying the evidence or lack thereof, to cover up their tracks? Or, well, it's all destroyed. Nobody can really go back there and check and see if anything happened that we're talking about. That's pretty interesting that there was no ability to go check on this story because the countryside was destroyed. People were dissipated. So you have this tiny little area here. And the reality is that it was well built up, it was well trafficked, and yet nobody ever heard of this guy. There's no record of this person ever existing at any point in history. There's no archaeological finds, nothing. Zero, zilch. No writer makes mention of him or Christians or Christianity until it is claimed, the end of the 1st century with Josephus. And as we know, and as you know, I have this gone into details on all of these. Again, these supposed references. I add even more material in this one, who was Jesus, addressing some of the really lame references that are raised by Christian apologists like Thales and Phlegon and Mars Serapion and stuff like that.
Africanus is my favorite. You know, the sun was blotted for a second. That means
that was Thales. He's reporting
oh, okay, sorry.
Centuries later on a supposed phenomenon in the 1st century. And we don't even know if this guy wrote in the 1st century, Thales. There's another Thales. There are other Thaleses. So it all hinges on this. And they use the most egregious sophistry when they report these things. Like, they'll say, well, Thales did not deny that Jesus was Christ. See, Thales never used the words Jesus or Christ. He never said, according to the one line we have from Africanus or Cincillus, whoever came first, that Thales reported on what sounds like an eclipse. There's no mention of Christ in there, that this eclipse happened at Christ's death. That was all added to the story. So then you have, like I said, this sophistry where, well, so-and-so didn't deny that Jesus existed. Well, therefore, that's a testimony to Christ's existence. That's the best they can do. And like I said, this is a CSI investigation. That's not going to stand up. You can't have such a ridiculous commentary like that and have that taken. If you took it into court, it'd be laughed out of court. So, in other words, because no one denied that so no one has denied that you didn't commit the crime, therefore you didn't commit the crime. I mean, it's ridiculous.
One of the first things people always kind of fall into believing Jesus was historical was they assumed that the Gospels were written right after the death of Christ, but you prove quite the opposite, right?
Well, I'd like to think I proved it. That's part of the book that I'm most fond of, I have to say, the dating section of it, because it really hasn't been. There's certain aspects of it that I've never seen anywhere. Most of this book is original in the sense that I used some of it is just like pointing out contradictions and inconsistencies and so forth, but being filtered through my mind, chronological problems, stuff like that. That some of these, of course, a lot of these arguments have been made before, and I have credited them where credit is due in many places. Naturally, I have many footnotes and a fairly large, extensive bibliography. But the late dating aspect of it, there have been other people who have noticed this over the years, and it hasn't been given as the attention that it should be because, of course, naturally, the people who noticed it were shouted down and ridiculed. Even though, from a CSI-style forensic perspective, they were accurate. For example, in the 19th century, which, regardless of the disparagement of the 19th century, the fact is that a lot of incredibly good scholarship was done during that time, and there are reasons for that. And that would be a whole other show.
I agree.
The conspiracy behind the dumbing down of the educational system. We had a person called, well, he was anonymous when he released this book, very thick book called Supernatural Religion, that went into detail on virtually every early Christian writer, the first 2-3 centuries. Now, since we have almost nothing, the only thing we could really point to from the first century would be the Pauline epistles and maybe something with Clement of Rome, but other than that, everything starts in the 2nd century. That's my contention with the Gospels as well, the canonical Gospels. So this person's supernatural religion went for the first few centuries, which would be the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and went through all of the works of the Christian fathers, the early church fathers, of which there are a significant amount. It's quite a challenge to go through them. And he went through them in the original languages, the Greek and the Latin. Because, again, back there in the much disparaged 19th century, back then, they actually knew Greek and Latin. These people were very well educated, much better than they are today, the ones who we find in the field often. So anyway, going through the Greek and the Latin, he went through with a fine-tooth comb and tried to find anything that resembled, well, particularly verbatim, but even not quite so verbatim, anything from the canonical Gospels. And he found absolutely nothing until the last quarter of the 2nd century. There is nothing. Now, we could do this today. There's something called the database, I think it's called Lingua Graecae, but it's all of the books in Greek, in the original Greek, all Greek texts dating up until I think it was around 600 CE, which is also known as AD, that you can search. It's a searchable database. It's incredibly expensive, but I would love to have my hands on it, of course. So you could, in effect, put in a Greek sentence from the New Testament and see if it shows up verbatim anyway. And I don't know the parameters of the search engine, obviously, because I have never used it. But this database would be fantastic because we could then find out exactly when all this started. But in any case, without the database, with the text before him, he was able to discern that, again, the canonical Gospels cannot be found in the literary record until the end of the 2nd century, beginning around 170. Now, the conclusion of supernatural religion was not precisely to date them then. He just pointed that out, and he tried to, so much anger was directed his way that he tried to say, look, I'm just pointing this out. I'm not making any conclusions as to the dates. Fast forward a little bit to Charles Waite in the History of the Christian Religion in the year 200. Now, he takes that research, and he goes with it and says, well, I am putting dates to it, and the dates I've come up with are the ones that I use in my book, which are, again, the last quarter of the 2nd century. So this is Charles Waite's conclusion of what the dates are. Now, we know what the mainstream puts the dates at, that they tried desperately to get them in the 1st century because, of course, they want to get it as close as possible to what supposedly actually happened. And so there's a wishful thinking dating that is really not based on scientific evidence. It's only based on the a priori assumption that the gospel story occurred. So once you make that conclusion, then you have to think, well, what's the earliest we can put these gospels at, because they have to have been written by supposed eyewitnesses and or disciples who saw whatever they supposedly saw, and then the others were just like Mark and Luke were buddies of somebody who supposedly saw something. So even those two are not eyewitnesses. Wishful thinking is trying to put Matthew at 37 CE up to 100, and then Mark to 40 to 73, Luke 50 to 100, John 65 to 100. So the maximum they'll push this back is 100. And the later scholarship by they call more liberal, with Mark, for example, being the earliest one and dating to around 73, they claiming, well, this obviously isn't a prediction of the destruction of the temple, so it's a recording of the temple's destruction after the fact, so it had to have been right after the temple was destroyed. And so then they work backwards from there, but that's also based on wishful thinking. There is no real evidence. There is no external, the only thing they're going by is internal evidence, which is assuming that it actually happened, that this guy really existed at the time that he supposedly existed. So then we can't push it any much further out because John is supposed to be an eyewitness. He must have died by then, so the latest he could have written is about 100. He's probably an old man by then. And that's, like I said, it's internal evidence only. So if you factor in the external evidence, however, you find inferences to earlier texts such as the Gospel of Matthew or the Logia of the sayings of the Lord, a sayings gospel attributed to Matthew in Hebrew or Aramaic by Bishop Papias, supposedly saw this thing. Now, this text, this book, is still not evidence of the canonical Gospels. It seems to be different. It's definitely different than the canonical Matthew. So that is not evidence that the canonical Matthew existed at that time, which would have been the early part of the 2nd century. So same thing with Justin Martyr, and I go to the details in WWJ, Who Was Jesus, that Justin Martyr also really provides no solid evidence that the canonical Gospels existed. I have an extensive argument in Sons of God about that, about Justin Martyr in particular. A little bit less, much less actually in ChristCon, and then there's a little bit different, some more. All of these books have added information to them. I don't repeat myself. Try not to anyway. This is what was demonstrated was that if you're looking for real instances of reference to anything that could remotely be determined to have come from the canonical Gospels themselves, not until the late 2nd century. What Charles Waite the dates Charles Waite came up with were Luke 170, Mark 175, John 178, and Matthew 180. I go into a little bit of discussion of the different priority, the reasons for problems with the priority. Because things like, if Mark came first, why didn't he mention the divine birth? He seems to assume the reader knows something already. Then if Mark didn't come first, why doesn't he mention things that are in Matthew, and so on? That order, I don't really go into details of why the order is. You'd have to look into Waite. But I do give some really interesting data on why the Gospels, besides the fact that externally they do not appear in the record until that time, I also give more data on how internally you can date them to that later time as well. For example, the Lucan prologue. I dug up, I had help, but I was able to dig up quotes in the original Greek from some of the church fathers, such as Origen and Jerome and Epiphanius, where they appear to be referring to Gnostic heretics as writers that Luke, in his prologue, also refers to. In the prologue of Luke, he states that many had tried to put their hand to writing the diegesis before him, the diegesis being the narrative. Right at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, he's saying, many have tried to write this story before me. There's been much curiosity. Who are the many? Of course, early apologists wanted to say, well, that's Matthew, Mark, and John. But there were problems with that. First of all, as one of the, I think it was also Origen, said, no, because they didn't try to write the narrative. They succeeded. So they are not part of the many. We can exclude the canonical gospel writers from that, from the many. So other church fathers tried to determine who the many were, and they mentioned Basilides, who did not exist until, or did not publish until the second quarter of the 2nd century. And they also mentioned the Gospel of the Egyptians, Gospel of the 12 Apostles. And I dug up the Greek and the Latin for these fathers making these comments. That was not easy to do.
Oh, I'm sure. Jesus.
They don't make this. Nobody else. This is the thing that you got in this book that you can hardly find that anywhere. So if you pick up my book, you now have that in your hand. Some of this research was really quite tenacious. I was like a pit bull going after it, and like I say, I had to help. So I provide the original Latin of Jerome, who is also appearing to point to, he's specifically addressing the prologue of Luke, the Lucan prologue. He's saying, the evangelist Luke declares that there were many who wrote Gospels when he says, for as much as many, etc., which being published by various authors gave rise to several heresies. Remember, this is Jerome I'm quoting. They were such as that, according to the Egyptians, the Gospel according to the Egyptians, Thomas and Matthias and Bartholomew, and that of the Apostles and Basilides and Apelles, and others. It would be too tedious to enumerate. So anyway, we have this bombshell in the Latin. Oddly enough, if you go to look up, this is the preface to his commentary on Matthew from Jerome. If you go to look that up in English, you can almost never find that translation. You certainly aren't going to find the original Latin, but they remove the translations you find online, for example, in the preface. You won't even find that paragraph about the prologue and the many, the Egyptians, the Thomas and Basileus and the Palace and all that. They've edited it out. I had to dig up the original Latin, and I got that was Wade's translation. There's also a book called by someone named Theron who also has a translation. It's a little bit more, let's say, up in the air as to what he's saying, but I don't think you could make any other conclusion. That he's specifically addressing the many, and he's mentioning these Gnostic heretics. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is that means that Luke could not have been written until all those other Gospels had been written. There's no evidence that any of those people wrote any of those Gospels before the 2nd century. The many that Luke is superseding, some of these people lived up until 138, maybe the middle of the century, 150. He could not have been writing his Gospel any earlier than that. It's my contention, it was also Wade's contention, that Luke is also largely basing his New Testament on the work of the Gnostic heretic. He's called a heretic now, but he wasn't then. Marcion. Marcion, in fact, was almost I believe the bishop of Rome, and at the last minute, somebody freaked out, and basically he had contributed quite a bit of money. He was a well-known churchman. He was well-respected, but he was also somewhat more true to what was happening. And I mean, there's this whole debate whether or not the Gnostics, the docetic Gnostics, mean that Jesus Christ never existed in flesh. They did say that he did not come in the flesh. Now, they're trying to make that sound as if, well, it really happened on Earth, but he was this guy in a weird body. When, in fact, within Gnosticism, as far as I'm concerned, it all takes place in, what is it, the pleroma? No, it's not in this dimension, not in the 3rd dimension. So you cannot say he existed historically, even within the docetic Gnosticism. They're not claiming that he was in a fleshy body at any point. It can be happening in a dream world, but that doesn't make it historically true. Marcion comes and puts together the first New Testament. That should be a clue, too, to the dating.
Yeah, middle of the 2nd century.
There's no mention in this New Testament. There's no Gospel of Mark or Gospel of Luke, or rather Gospel of John or Gospel of Matthew. In fact, they're not heard of. And what the later churchmen did was say, well, Marcion took the Gospel of Luke and removed this part and removed that part and changed this part and whatnot. But in fact, what it looks like is Luke took Marcion's Gospel and added to it and changed it and edited it and so forth. That's what it looks like. And when we will start looking at, well, what about Mark and Matthew, and they all three have parts in common, it looks like it's Marcion's Gospel again. That's one of the common texts, because there are several common texts being used here. Waite has broken Luke down into, well, it wasn't him, but I think it was, it was a German scholar, broken the text into 33 that Luke drew on. Looking at Luke even further, we have that sort of evidence going on with the Marcion, and then we have the other Gnostic heretics. And then who's this character Luke is addressing, and also the author of Acts, which is pretty much the same person, but it's quite possible that they had been interpolated and edited and whatnot. But both Luke Acts refer to this character named Theophilus. And there's been a big debate, does Theophilus just mean God lover, or is it a real person? Well, it's my contention is not only is a real person, but he was the bishop of Antioch. It just so happens to be at the same era when the Gospels first make their prominent entry into the historical record at the end of the 2nd century, again. So if you combine all of this evidence, Theophilus, the heretics, the fact that all of a sudden in that last quarter, 2nd century, everybody starts writing about the Gospels, making commentary on them. We go to the Gospel of John. There's also more evidence of its late dating. That late dating, I mean. For example, it's supposedly written against Cerinthus. Cerinthus, another Gnostic heretic, appears to have written in the middle of the 2nd century. However, because of that admission by Jerome, for one, that the Gospel of John was written against Cerinthus, the wishful thinking daters are trying to put Cerinthus back to 100. He must have been alive before John, therefore. So if John didn't die until 100, then Cerinthus must be around 100 too. So it's all wishful thinking again, no basis in scientific fact. At that point, when the Gospel of John is released, all of a sudden, what I contend it was released, so then that's when you start finding it in historical literary records around 175. Then all of a sudden there's this flurry of activity to defend it by Irenaeus, for example. And then after that, you have all kinds of commentaries coming out on the Gospels, the canonical Gospels. Before that, nothing. I mean, if you had released a book, when you first release a book, and it's attacked like that, I mean, it all usually happens at once if it's getting any kind of attention, and we know that they did get attention. And there's also kind of this pet project thing going on with Irenaeus, as if he had something to do with this book. His defense of it is so fervent. So it all seems to be that it all happened at that time. As far as the late dating of the Gospels go, interestingly enough, Miguel, I don't know if you know this, but in Price's, in his latest, not quite his latest, but one of his latest books, the pre-Nicene New Testament, where he's translating all these texts from the Greek, he is thrown his hat into the same ring of the late dating of the Gospel. It doesn't go as far as giving them dates in the last half or the last quarter of the 2nd century, but he thinks Marcion was the source of Luke. So we're talking in Ur Lucas, Ur Marcus, around 150. And that, I mean, that's, there's not too many scholars today who are willing to go out on that limb. I'll take that as a nod that I'm not completely mad, but I never thought I was. On this subject, I'm telling you, if you look at it forensically, CSI style, not just an opinion based on whether or not we wish it to be true, but that you start looking and say, look, where is the evidence? There's no physical, literary, archaeological evidence of the existence of the canonical Gospels until that time. As I said, I didn't start out to discover that. I discovered it. And it just, lo and behold, fits into a lot of other interesting aspects of this mystery. If you have this story and it actually happened in time, in the order that it was claimed, the beginning of the 1st century, then we have all this stuff as far as comparative mythology that starts to become problematic. Just so happens that this starts to explain the comparative mythology too, as for example the influence of Mithra. If you date Jesus' advent to before Mithra was really prominent, which happened largely in the 2nd century and onward, then you're like, well, that obviously Mithraism copied Christianity. But in fact, there's no evidence of Christianity they say there's no evidence of Mithraism, there's no more evidence of Christianity being around at that time either. Looks like they were pretty neck and neck, but there were other characters that I claim and others have asserted were that Christ was predicated upon these characters. For example, Asclepius. We just happened to find that the Gospel of John seems to be mentioning a monument in Judea to the god Serapis or Asclepius, who became merged.
Where was that in the Gospel of John?
He talks about a building with 5 porticos.
Oh, okay. I know
and
what that is.
There is no building of that description in, say, Josephus. So we're talking around, the end of the 1st century. There is no building in the record. In fact, it doesn't appear until around 135, after Judea is destroyed and rebuilt now in a more classical Greek fashion by Hadrian. So there's a little more internal evidence that John was written later than 135. he's all of a sudden mentioning this building that seems to be a healing sanctuary for Serapis and Asclepius. Well, lo and behold, what does Serapis Asclepius, they're mentioned, Asclepius was strictly a Greek god, strictly I say, but as opposed to Serapis, it was a conglomeration of Osiris and Apis, but this figure was created in, so overtly by the priesthood that everyone knows that, well, yes, they merged these two gods. I'm saying the same thing happened with Jesus Christ, that they did the same thing. They made up a new god to merge different cultures. Serapis was created specifically in Egypt to accommodate Greek as well as Egyptian worshippers, but also the Jewish worshippers. So they have this Serapis character who just happens to be, and he's associated with Asclepius, who was the healing god, who was wearing white robes, and Serapis too was wearing long, curly black hair with a beard, looking exactly like the images we have in our minds of Christ. The earliest images of Christ were fair-haired and beardless and young, but this one, the one that we have most in our minds, as far as I'm concerned, is a direct lift from Asclepius. And then now we have here the evidence that, sure enough, Asclepius or Serapis were popular before Christ supposedly existed, or rather before the story becomes known at the end of the 2nd century, where it starts really getting known in that area. It's just really interesting how much you can uncover when you start looking really closely at the story, not just accepting. You hear these things like people say, well, so-and-so is a liberal scholar, like Croissant, and he doesn't think that Jesus didn't exist. Well, first of all, he's a Catholic. I think he would claim to this day to be a pious Catholic. And a priest. Was it not priest, or is it Meyer I'm thinking of? Those two are very confused. They get confused. But they were both serious Catholic scholars. They're not atheist scholars. So obviously they're not going to say, even if they were atheist scholars, they're not going to just say, well, I don't think Jesus existed. But they do that, even though they make these conclusions, they do that without any real solid scientific evidence. It's just based on hearsay. It's based on, well, we believe it because we were told it was true, and I don't see any evidence to prove it. And all sorts of other arguments that are really just sophistry and not. I want to see clear-cut evidence. Like I watch CSI Miami. That's what I keep referring to. I really like the show. Now I want to see. That's what I'm doing here, looking at it very closely like that, without a prejudice either way. If I found something that could show me that the canonical Gospels, for example, really did exist prior to the end of the 2nd century. I've looked at the Rylands fragment. It's not conclusive. Definitely not conclusive. It's something like 4 lines from the Gospel of John. It just does not fit. It also doesn't have to be dated to that period. It could be much later. It could be the end of the 2nd century, in fact. So I go into the details on some of the papyri as well in WWJ.
Acharya, we could probably go into take a whole another show on all the contradictions, and there's plenty of websites where people can look for the contradictions in the Gospels. But what most people never realize is the blatant anachronisms in the canonical Gospels. What are some of the main ones?
Well, that one that I just discussed about the building in Jerusalem that John includes in his gospel that apparently was not there until 135, after 135. That's one big one. The general depiction of the gospel story is fallacious. You have this notion that it was set in this, rolling fields and hills with all the shepherds running around and Stone Age agriculture. And just it's not set. It's set in a Judea of 600 years prior, possibly. It's something like we would depict, modern America in the Middle Age England. It's like, what? It doesn't fit at all. People running around here speaking Shakespearean English. Yeah, that's what they've done. You know, you have these people, it's really anachronistic. They use anachronistic terminology for the towns. They weren't named that at the time. What they've done was they've used the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, that was translated sometime 2nd, 3rd centuries before the Common Era. And the writers of the New Testament used that text. It's my contention, they weren't even in Judea, the writers of the New Testament. They didn't even know the area that they were looking in. They're using the Septuagint and writing the names of places and the general feeling it got from that. Of course, now that's a translation of a text that was written. Many people claim it was compiled after the Babylonian exile. So it's not even, 6 centuries before the Common Era. So that's why it appears to be, the story is set 6 centuries before the Common Era. In the meantime, instead of this vast wilderness of shepherds, if you read Josephus describing the territory, and the archaeological records certainly will bear this out, it is densely populated. There are structures everywhere. There's really no place for shepherds to be romping around. Where, like I said, it's been well-traveled for centuries. It's not this little isolated place. On the one hand, there are numerous statements that Christ was famed far and wide. The king of Syria knows about him. He's famed far and wide. There's numerous contentions of that in the Gospels themselves. I list those, by the way, as well. And then there's no mention of him in the historical record whatsoever by anyone, including Jews who traveled to the area. Some of them lived there. Josephus was there. Someone like Philo.
Yeah, he was
very
keenly
there. Interested. Yeah, he was keenly interested in the history of the time, and he was there. Supposedly, he was alive when Christ was supposed to have been crucified, and didn't hear any of these tales. Nothing. And that's even more astounding because Philo wrote extensively about the Word, the Logos. He combined Jewish concepts. In fact, that's where they got this concept from, largely from Philo. He combined Jewish concepts with Greek concepts. And presto, you have Jesus Christ. Oh, and that's the other thing, too. In the Greek Old Testament, prior to the Christian era, this is already in existence, the name Christos is mentioned dozens of times. This word Christos is associated with a number of characters, including King David, Solomon. So you have already being called Christ, and you have also Jesus dozens of times, Joshua in the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament. The name Joshua was already translated as Jesus in Greek. So you already have that name, and Christos, to have Jesus and Christ in there. So the readers of the Septuagint are already aware of these names. Then there are other texts, like the pre-Christian wisdom sayings of Jesus. Oh, some guy named Jesus had sayings. Okay, so could it be that some of the sayings of Jesus, the New Testament, are from that Jesus, pre-Christian? That I go into a little more detail in other books, but not in this one, WWJ. But I do discuss other anachronisms.
Yeah,
we know the famous Quirinius' census. That's a big brouhaha. Got a little bit about that. Also, there's a couple of misstatements by Christ as supposedly the omniscient Lord of the cosmos. He doesn't seem to know, for example, if the high priest during the time of David was Abiathar or Ahimelech, things like this. Also, Christ seems to be, he's quoting from the Septuagint, not the Hebrew Old Testament, in which there are some really, it's a translation of a difficult text, so, there are mistakes in it. So he's actually backing up some of the mistakes that are, because it's my contention that what the New Testament writers did was take the Septuagint and patch that together with other texts that they found and with concepts floating around the Mediterranean at the time, and that this character, Jesus Christ, is a fictional entity, and he didn't say anything. They're putting all these words into his mouth, and that's why he can make mistakes. Yeah, I mean, there's also some words. This I really would like to see more of a study done. The word for synagogue was not used in the context of having a temple in your house, so to speak, a synagogue, until after the destruction of the temple. So all this yakety-yak about synagogues in there is anachronistic. There's certain words that were not in use at the time for that meaning when these gospel writers supposedly were writing this stuff down. I'm sure more of that could be figured out. If we were to look at it, you look at the 100 years ago, English is a little bit different than today. Not that much. 200 years ago, more so. 300 years ago, obviously, get back to Shakespeare and Chaucer, and then Chaucer before that, and it really gets different. But still, there are certain characteristics of our speech today that are different from 100 years ago. So if you have these gospel texts actually being written at the end of the 2nd century, by reading them in the original Greek and putting them side by side with other examples from the era they were supposedly written in, you should be able to see a difference in the writing style. Now, they change from writer to writer, of course, as well, but you get a feel for it just like you do with reading older texts. They using more antiquated language. That's how they can determine which Pauline epistles were written first, or that they were written before the canonical Gospels, because they have a different feel to them, more antiquated language in some ways. We know that this is a study that is done. Now, if we can get people with clear minds to do this study and look at it without bringing in their religious prejudices, saying, well, this really happened, and let's not say either way that it happened or it didn't happen. Just let's look at the data purely and see. That looks more like it was written at the end of the 2nd century. It just has a feel about it. You read it. The Greek is more of that era. I'm sure that there are people out there today who, actually not that many people know the Greek all that well anymore, but there are still some scholars who, if they could toss away their preconceived notions and look at it like that and say, yeah, this is not going to fit into the middle of the 2nd century. There is no way, if you read what I've put together on Luke, for example, there is no way you can fit Luke into the middle of the 2nd century. No way, Jose. You're going to tell me that the Gospels of Apelles and Basilides and the Egyptians and Thomas and Bartholomew, those were all written before Luke in the middle of the 2nd century, the 1st century? No, definitely not. How are these heretics? Who are they? All of a sudden they spring up out of nowhere shortly after Jesus died and start writing their fanciful texts? No, the fanciful texts were first. He's even saying that. These absurd Gnostic texts that clearly are not meant historically. This is to claim that the Nag Hammadi texts provide any evidence of historical Jesus. You get laughed out of, the halls of academia.
Right, very true.
And so, if Luke is saying that those texts were first, then you have a clear-cut admission that the fanciful tales were first, and these are not historical texts. So again, it's our contention that this fantasy was up in the air, so to speak, with Gnosticism. They were not writing about, the Egyptian connections they loom large on the horizon, especially when you start getting into Gnosticism. It's fantastic. This new book that I just released, an ebook based on claims in the fabulous Zeitgeist flick that's been going around the internet, I just cobbled together. I could only cover a few of the aspects of the Horus myth that many claim has influenced Christianity quite a bit. But even there, we have quite a bit of Gnostic Egyptian Christian art, or as you would expect it. Your frequent listeners will know well about Gnosticism from your many great shows on the subject.
Thank you.
That Gnosticism incorporates language I don't know how many cultures. I lost count after a while, but you have of course the Jewish, you have Jewish language, so you have some Hebrew in there, probably Aramaic, right? And then you have Syrian. All those three slightly different but related. Then there's Greek and Egyptian, and is there Latin in there? I'd have to look more closely. I think there's certainly inferences of Sanskrit, if it's not Chaldean, which is kind of seems like a bridge between Hebrew and Sanskrit. And so what they've done is take language. This is how you would create a whole new culture that is a hybrid of everything else. You take all the languages and merge them together, and they've done that with all these bizarre terms. And of course, within that, you find hybrid Egyptian language as well. In the artwork, too. And isn't it odd that one of the things I show in here, I do delve into a little bit of, in Who Was Jesus? I delve into a little bit of comparative mythology. I wanted to just make it some really solid stuff. I didn't want to bring anything that was going to weaken the case, obviously. But the one thing that strikes me so obvious is the story of Lazarus, only found in the Gospel of John. You would think this would be newsworthy and would make it into the other Gospels, that Jesus had raised a dead and smelly guy from the dead.
Well, he does that he does raise other people, but this one is because it's 4 days or something like that.
Yeah, Jairus' daughter. Well, interestingly enough, I contended this in ChristCon, I contended it in Sons of God, I contended it in Who Was Jesus. That story is Osiris being raised from the dead, period, no question about it. Horus, in, the Book of the Dead, calls forth Osiris from the tomb after 4 days. This is an Egyptian story, an Egyptian story. Now, in the Gospel story, there are two, a Mary and a Martha, standing by. Osiris' sisters. Well, in the Egyptian story, there are the two Mertas. Martha, Mary, Merta. Sounds a little bit familiar.
Yeah, slightly.
And they are Isis and Nephthys, and they're called Mertas. They just happen to be Osiris' sisters. Sound a little familiar?
Slightly, yes. Slightly.
And here's another interesting little tidbit. Osiris we find in Judea, and he has the god appellation appended to his name, El. Now the one artifact we have is Osiris El, or Osar El, but there's no reason that we couldn't switch that, and it would be El Osiris, be Lazarus. That's how you break it down anyway. It's El Azarus, El Osiris, El Asar. His name is Asar or Azar in Egyptian. And it's interesting that this story is only in the Gospel of John, of Lazarus being raised from the dead. If it was historical, you'd think they would all be jumping on it. They would be like, well, yes, they raised Jairus' daughter, for example, in Luke, is it not? But the thing is also we have in the Gospel of John, I contend, was written probably in Egypt, probably at Alexandria, for an Egyptian audience. I am 100% certain that it was written for an Egyptian audience, and that is why we have the raising of Lazarus in that book, Gospel of John.
And the prologue, too. I mean, that's right out of Philo, isn't it?
The prologue with the word. Well, interestingly enough, too, in the Egyptian mythology is this character named Anubis, who has this whole role as Massey calls him the baptizer, but he is he dips Horus into the lake, the heavenly lake, and like John the Baptist. And the thing is, this is something that I'm doing some research on for a follow-up book, Christ in Egypt, which is inspired by what happened with the Zeitgeist material and the new ebook that I did on that. But the whole Egyptian connection is so supreme, especially with the Gospel of John, that this character, Anup, you see, if we were to take this whole story, the Christ mythology, Christ myth, out of context, well, the way they've put it, the people who have promulgated it as historical have it in this ridiculous rinky-dink context of having no influence from the outside world, this tiny little place that's just empty of people in Judea, 90 miles, there's no influence. Somehow they had a little force field around them. There was absolutely no connection with the real world outside of it. If you put it into context in the Mediterranean, and you have all these myths going on, you have serious civilization. Just watch Gladiator, okay? Man, you really need help on seeing how massively built up the Mediterranean area was. Let's look at the Egyptian at the time. It was already in decay, but it was massive. It wasn't this just little isolated world. It was cosmopolitan. The Mediterranean at the time was cosmopolitan. They had a brotherhood all around it that was well organized, competing, always competing, just like today. But they still exchanged. And this is where Paul is going when he goes to Ephesus and Corinth and even Athens. He's going to the seats of the brotherhood, mystery school seats. This is all going. It's very sophisticated. It's not this little dinky place in the backwater where nobody knows anything. And you got illiterate fishermen as your illiterate fishermen. I'm not following these people. What do they know? I mean, I'm sure those illiterate fishermen are very wise, but I don't think that God would choose to come to Earth and hang around with them and say, let's go out and create a religion globally. I mean, why don't you go right to Rome where the problems really are? I was talking about the slavery thing before. I got off track with the slavery. There's massive, horrible slavery going on, and instead Jesus shows up to, wow some elders in Judea in the temple there. It's like, what? Go to Rome and save the slaves. What the heck is that all about? That's ridiculous. So, there's no condemnation of slavery. In fact, there's encouragement of it. Just continue to be slaves. Don't rock the boat. Remember, you represent the Lord. So anyway, we have in Egypt this whole thing going on. We have this huge library and a university, and we have Alexandria, this town, and it's got 50% Jewish population at the time. So a significant amount of people. You have all these gods of the Egyptian culture, and not only in Egypt, but by the 1st century, they're very popular in Rome as well, including Isis. Isis was huge in Rome. Arguably, at that time, she was the most popular divinity in the whole Mediterranean area. Along with her is this little character called Anubis that nobody really knows about. Now, if you put all this into context, you realize that Anubis was also extremely popular in a sense that he's associated with Isis very closely. He helps Isis find Osiris. He's Osiris's embalmer. He's a very prominent figure. Now, if you're going to usurp someone else's religion, you will have to take these prominent characters and do something with them. They're not just going to be given up. I'm going to say, oh, I liked Isis yesterday. I think tomorrow I'll start worshiping the Virgin Mary. No. The Virgin Mary is directly based on Isis for the reason that the people who created this story knew that they weren't going to give up the Virgin Isis, who was also called Mary, Mary meaning beloved in Egyptian. So they're going to take the most popular characters and they're going to turn them into disciples, saints, prophets, patriarchs. This has already been done in the Old Testament. The Jewish scribes were well skilled at this already, the priesthood. They'd done this with several gods. Moses, Joshua, these are tribal gods. They took the tribal gods. The Yahweh people said, well, we have to demote your gods into patriarchs. They didn't necessarily say that kindly. They probably said it with, blunt force.
Probably, yeah.
But we will incorporate your God. We'll just make him into a patriarch, and then we'll say that all of the godly adventures that he had, like making the sun stand still, which happens to be the name of the word for solstice, or the meaning of solstice. We'll just say that really happened on Earth, and he was a patriarch and so forth. The same thing was done with the Egyptian gods, including this character Anubis, who's, as far as I can tell, I haven't patched it all together yet, but because it's difficult. It's very difficult to patch this stuff together when you have thousands of years of degradation and dust collecting on everything you see and destruction. And also, there is no ancient encyclopedia that you can turn to and look up entries for Let's see, Horace. Oh, yes, I see, right here. It says, we Christians took Horace and turned him into Jesus. That text does not exist. That's what the critics want me to come up with. I can't come up with that text, sorry. I can come up with intimation Christ was born of a virgin. You're saying then that the sons of Job were depicted as being born of a virgin, crucified, and resurrected. This is Justin Martyr. He's trying to say, we're not insane. We're not saying anything more than you are. But he's admitting then that there are these pre-Christian predecessors with the same motifs. Well, being a diligent forensic archaeologist, that's right, I'm a CSI, I'm looking at this. This is a crime scene. There's no doubt about it. As far as I'm concerned, it's a hideous crime. I mean, it's a typical crime. In the priesthood, I'm sure they thought to themselves, hey, look, all the gods are made up anyway. We have a clear-cut instance here with Serapis where the priesthood sat down and said, let's make up another god right now to incorporate these different cultures so they get along. Well, they did it again. They'd done it before, they did it again. If you do not believe in Dionysus and Hercules and Zeus and even Ganesha, the elephant-headed god in India, or the Egyptian gods, or Hercules, Hermes, any of these gods, you're claiming those gods are unreal. You're saying they're myths. Obviously, somebody made them up. Who made them up? Priests, frequently, have made them up. Well, I'm saying that one more was made up, just the same way. And this was the big daddy of them all, because they rolled together as many cultures as they could find in that area. And they picked as many of the most cherished qualities, or motifs, or themes, characteristics from all of those cultures. And they rolled them all into one. And they didn't have a nice little encyclopedia that they could scratch out the name of. Well, today we're going to imitate Dionysus. Let's scratch his name out and put Jesus in there. They didn't do that either. They picked and chose various motifs, rolled them all into one, made a cohesive story. And now, as a CSI, I have gone back and picked apart the motifs and traced them as best I can, and I continue to do this, to their original source, as original as we can get. Sources. A lot of them are several divine birth tales that they could have drawn on, and so on and so forth.
Well, Acharya, that's you definitely covered all the ground we needed. But I have one last question for you, and this is always the one that, which I don't understand. But why do you think fundamentalists have such an obsession with the King James version? You show in your book that they shouldn't.
Yeah, I spent a considerable amount of time analyzing the King James, how it was put together, and it's hard to believe that there are people today who will insist that it is also inerrant. Many, even evangelical scholars, have given up on the notion that any of the translations are inerrant. But the claim that the originals, the autographs, the first thing out of the pens of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those were inspired. Of course, they've been destroyed. Well, that doesn't make any sense either, does it to you? It's like, well, God came to earth, went to an awful lot of trouble to get his word out there, and then let his autographs all be destroyed. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, we know why they were destroyed.
Yes.
Covering up the tracks. Anyway, so we've got these mysterious inspired originals, and then everything from that is up until recently, there were people who absolutely insisted, and they still do, some of them still do, but even within the fields of academia, they would insist that the King James Version was inerrantly translated by God into the language that God wanted everyone to know. People in academia generally do not take that viewpoint seriously anymore. There are still King James inerrantists, however, who will cling to that notion. Against all reason, is all based on what they've been programmed with. There is no scientific basis for this claim at all. In fact, the science shows the opposite. The texts that they used to translate the King James Version were all late Greek texts. Since then, much more study has been done on earlier Greek texts that have been discovered, such as the Codices Sinaiticus and Vaticanus and And those texts you will find have been used for the basis of the reserved Revised Standard Version, which I also use. I use two versions, essentially. I throw in a few others in Who is Jesus. The Revised Standard Version, RSV, is based largely on the earliest Greek texts in existence. And you find some really interesting admissions throughout them that this is not in the original. But this is what I do too. I show a bunch of different phrases, sentences, important concepts that are not in those original Greek texts, somehow made their way into later Greek texts that were used for the basis of the King James Version. The King James, it was based on something called the Textus Receptus. It was put together by Erasmus, and he cobbled it together with a couple of the Greek texts that had been compiled, I think it was in the 12th century. He didn't have an ending for Revelation, so he went back to Jerome's Vulgate edition, and he translated the Revelation into Greek first, and then he translated it into English. And that's supposed to be the inerrant Word of God. And they're going to claim that, that all these people were inspired who translated it. Well, if they were all inspired to translate, why not have one translator then? There's something like 70, there's a whole slew of translators working on the King James Version. They had to carefully compare them to each other. They translate one section, somebody else translate one section, compare them, go back and forth. If you can inspire, if God is all omnipotent and can inspire somebody to translate, just have one person do it then. Absolutely perfectly, one shot, no problem. Why do you need all these checks and balances from humans? It's a big mess, and I show that, what a big mess, all these discrepancies show up, and I dug around in the footnotes of these translations and brought out some of the more juicy, bizarre things, like the Ascension. This is a really critical part of the gospel story, and yet it's not found in Matthew, and John also omits it. So all of a sudden you get it in Mark, but we find out, lo and behold, it's an addition. Luke kind of again, looks like an interpolation there. So how could Matthew supposedly was there when it happened. He just happened to forget the ascension. Matthew and John, the only two eyewitnesses, do not write about it. John is full of magical tricks and miracles. Does not write about the ascension. Jesus floats up into the air in front of these people, but they think, I don't know if I want to mention that. We are setting out to prove that this guy was the God of the cosmos, but that might sound a little far-fetched. Could it be that it didn't happen? Could it be there was an afterthought when maybe the writers of the New Testament heard other people's stories, or other God stories, like maybe that of Buddha ascending into, ooh, you know what, that's a good one, let's put that in there. I think that's how it happened. I think that's how it happened with almost all of the miracles in there. Came across another miracle. Water to wine. We got a lot of followers of Dionysus. Yeah, Dionysus turned water into wine, didn't he? Let's stick that one in there. Sounds good. We want those followers of Dionysus to respect our God. How about miraculously escaping from a tyrant at birth? Gospel of Matthew. Heard of this little story about Krishna, miraculously escaped from a tyrant at birth, showing his power as God. Ooh, that sounds like a good one. Let's put that in there. The Gospel of Matthew, I contend, was written not necessarily largely for an Indian audience, because it wasn't that large, but there was an Indian audience in the Roman Empire, and they were telling these stories, evidently. We even find Indian artifacts in the Roman Empire. This is the thing that people don't realize either, but they take it out of the milieu. List the story out, and then nobody realizes how much cultural influence was occurring, cultural exchange from many different cultures. There had been a trade to India for centuries. You had Alexander the Great, but you also had a sea trade going through the Red Sea and extending down into past the Arabian Peninsula over to India. And there were spices, and they found statuary of Roman gods, at least one, Lakshmi, at Pompeii, in the ruins of Pompeii. So there was plenty of India. Again, you could watch Gladiator, you get an idea of how multicultural it was. There was people from all over the place, and they all had their gods. And they were exchanging stories. Well, my god did this, and my god did that. And they always try to top each other, especially the priests. So that's how it came about. and that's what I keep trying to show in one book after another.
Yeah, well, you've done an excellent job, and certainly with this book, Who Was Jesus? Fingerprints of the Christ. But I think that's all the time we have today, Acharya. Once again, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis.
Oh, I appreciate it, as always. I had wonderful interviews with you, and I know that we can keep doing this for as long as there is civilization and we are alive.
Yes, until they come get us. Somebody will. Sooner or later, somebody's going to come and get us. So we just got to get it done. But anyway, good luck with the book, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you very much, my dear.